All right, so the Silent Hill 2 remake is significantly better than trailers we've seen. We just watched the trailer. So we're going to give this a gander and see what GameSpot has to say.
Quite like horror. At its best, there's no genre quite like horror. At its best, it's so much more than guts and gore or tired tropes and vile torture scenes. It's self-reflection. It's catharsis.
100.
It relies on your own fears, traumas, and beliefs to create resonance with what's laid in front of you. The more vulnerable a work is, the greater its opportunity to connect with, or possibly alienate, its audience. This is precisely what makes Silent Hill 2 such a memorable and pivotal entry in the horror game genre. Its sheer vulnerability.
So this is a complete remake and rehaul of the second one. I thought that was the case, but I wasn't 100% sure because I hadn't looked into it.
Creates a game where an even alienation feels like connection.
So are they kind of doing the same thing that Resident Evil's been kind of doing and remaking their previous games to fit the current tech?
I say all this to emphasize that the upcoming remake of this 23-year-old game is an incredibly exciting prospect to me. Though the original holds up well, there's no denying that it feels quite dated, and not always in an endearing time capsule kind of way. There's also no denying that the game is incredibly influential. Its DNA is woven into countless horror games and horror-adjacent titles, with last year's Alan Wake 2 proving that even decades later, this continues to be
the Alan Wake series in general. I played the first one and it was really cool how they had that whole thing set up, and definitely gave me a similar vibe to like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill-esque style horror game.
True. This ultimately elevates Silent Hill 2's status from great game to a genre essential, albeit one that is frustrating to play or even simply access at the moment.
Sure.
A remake, then, seems entirely warranted. However, following Konami's recent treatment of the Silent Hill series and production partner Bloober's own perceived missteps, many have wondered if the company truly has a grasp on what makes Silent Hill 2 so special, and whether it can effectively remake it. It's a fair question, especially after a handful of less than impressive trailers. While my jaunt through the game's opening hours, including the infamous Woodside Apartments, can't make for a complete answer, what I saw left me impressed. Assuming the game's tone remains in place and what I played is a proper indication of what's to come, the upcoming remake could be an exceptional and reverent experience.
Okay.
Reverence was a consistent feeling throughout my playthrough, as Silent Hill 2 is an incredibly faithful adaptation helmed by a mix of the original game's key developers and fresh faces who cite Silent Hill 2 as among their greatest inspirations. I was pleased to note that the game didn't feel entirely reconstructed or reinterpreted as a means to satisfy perceived modern demands. Nor does it feel swayed by the urge to add in more jump scares, viscera, or plain old content. The game begins the same way it always has, with James Sunderland examining himself in a derelict bathroom mirror and explaining somewhat chillingly what brings him to Silent Hill. James's new voice actor, Luke Roberts, nails the delivery of this in every one of his monologues I heard, managing to sound both completely normal while also slightly off, breathy, dissociative.
It's ridiculous. Couldn't possibly be true. That's what I keep telling myself.
I like that narration.
As he makes his way down the winding, fog-drenched footpath that leads to Silent Hill, he passes a familiar red symbol, one of those long-forgotten save points. And yes, they remain vital and are the only form of saving progress in the remake.
Okay, dude, I definitely need to play some of the Silent Hills. It's just sad. They're like games that I've always wanted to try, but I've never gotten around to it. Kind of ridiculous I haven't played them though.
James then offers the same strange meta remark he did in the original game. Looking at this makes me feel like someone's groping around the inside of my skull. Though it seems like a small thing to be excited by, the game's retention of these minor surreal situations, there was a hole here, it's gone now, is another that comes to mind and is still present, feels like proof that the team understands how these quiet moments ultimately establish a more extreme level of dread than a high-fidelity Pyramid Head jump scare might. In fact, just the sheer retention
just the building up of that terror is really sweet.
Of the game's opening slow burn feels like a triumph. Silent Hill 2 earns and relies upon the way its opening minutes and their grotesque creatures found within them crawl. Similarly, the team repeatedly noted that Silent Hill 2 is not a combat-oriented game.
Somebody needs to send this game to Chuck stat. Somebody needs a pre-order for Chuck. Did you see that thing crawl? Oh my God, Chuck would shit himself.
It is not fast-paced, it is not punchy. The same can be said for its remake, which improves upon combat by making things a bit more fluid and adding an extremely helpful dodge button and an aiming reticle, but it does not necessarily overhaul the overall experience. For some, this could be frustrating, as it still has that light dusting of PS2 jank that something like the Resident Evil remakes have more or less done away with. However, I found that the remake's combat actually feels perfectly in service to the rest of the game. Part of what makes Silent Hill 2 as terrifying as it is are those small bursts of panic and tension that arise from its cumbersome combat. The remake seems to accept and build upon this, taking away the more unruly and frustrating aspects of combat while letting the game retain its sense of friction. Combat feels solid in Silent Hill 2, but it's not at the forefront. Fortunately, the team being so
good, it shouldn't be at the forefront, in my opinion, especially for a game like this where you're just building terror.
Forthcoming about that means that combat is treated truly as a secondary part and doesn't feel awkwardly pushed to the front and promoted only for it to feel less polished than your average survival horror game in 2024. Another way they emphasize this within the game is by retaining the remaster's choice to separate the combat and puzzle difficulty settings, allowing you to fine-tune your experience and select what level you wish to engage your brain or brawn. It's also worth noting that the main menu contains an impressive amount of accessibility options. We're talking pages of them. Whether a player has visual, auditory, or motor impairments, or merely likes being able to tweak a robust amount of player preference.
Badass. I mean, this is what I want from a AAA studio. Like, if you're going to put out something, give me some choices. I freaking like that. I like it, baby.
The option to do so probably exists in Silent Hill 2's remake.
And of course allows people with handicaps to enjoy the game as well, which is always a huge plus for me.
It's just another way.
Inclusiveness, baby.
Way that Silent Hill 2 emphasizes constant, meaningful upgrades rather than embracing complete AAA modernity at any cost. Of course, I can't gloss over the most drastic of all of these changes, the game's visuals. With the recent ongoing wave of remasters, remakes, and the like, the number one thing that I ask
Plague. It's called a plague.
Myself when playing these games is, does this feel like an attempt to make things sleek and modern? Or did they successfully create the bridge between what was once there and how my imagination expanded it when I played it all those years ago? The Silent Hill 2 remake does the latter, and it does so exceedingly well, and this is a welcome surprise considering how rough some of the trailers published by Konami and Bloober look. The Silent Hill 2 remake is a gorgeous game that doesn't abandon the grime, grotesquerie, and yes, fog that made the original game so mesmerizing.
Good.
In fact, it regularly amps it up. Locations are expanded upon with a handful of new buildings and eerie shops to walk through, and plenty of objects and smaller details that make the world seem more grounded in reality, even if that reality is one of horrific isolation. Neely's Bar, for example, no longer feels like merely a small, derelict cube, but looks like an actual abandoned bar. And as you stumble upon notes from off-kilter former residents, these locations transform into places with greater meaning. And yet, everything still feels the same. It still feels like Silent Hill. Suffocating. A place where the air feels tainted by a tangy metallic scent, and its people, hellish cerebral forces. Though there was some level of uncertainty around the game's character models, those I encountered, while not on the same level as the game's environments, looked surprisingly good. Though Angela's appearance in trailers seemed a
Screw that little kid. She stomped on his fingers.
bit off, to put it lightly, I found that her movements and VO were not particularly jarring in the game. And yet, what impressed me more than anything I've listed so far was the game's music and audio.
Pyramid Head, I feel like, needs a little bit of more muscle, though.
Though the game's music has been reworked, it feels familiar, with its iconic motifs wrapped in all new layers of dissonance, static, synth, and intensity. And along with the new music is a focus on 3D depth-oriented sound direction.
Ooh, that gave me chills. That gave me chillies.
Meaning steps, scrapes, creaks, moans, and shrieks feel even more unsettling, though remarkably more helpful as well. While the tracks I heard felt similar to what already existed, everything feels a bit deeper now, a bit darker, and it works incredibly well. As danger encroaches out on the streets of Southeast Vale, sharp, abrupt, and dissonant chords get your heart beating faster. In especially tense scenes, the
ground enemies are always the worst. They're a pain in the ass.
Sound takes on a life of its own. It feels like it's breathing alongside you. In short, I was incredibly impressed by the time I spent with Silent Hill 2 Remake.
Okay.
It is surreal, cerebral, horrifying, and grotesque. All of the things that made the original title such a remarkable game not only for Konami, but for the horror genre as well. Considering I was resigned to the game's beginning hours, and it's worth noting here that I'd estimate we're looking at about an 8 or so hour experience in total, based on what I imagined to accomplish within 3 of them, it's hard to tell if the game will nail its tone and message, if certain plot twists will remain as vile and unnerving, and if the studio will fully commit to creating a suffocating psychological hell above all else. However, after my time with Silent Hill 2 Remake, and after months of witnessing the internet and myself hem and haw on whether or not this remake has the capacity to be good.
Were they shooting at his head? I feel like I'm not going to aim at his head because it's made out of fucking steel. You know what I mean, dude? You know what I mean, guys? Like, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But maybe they were showing that the bullets bounce off.
I am no longer on the fence.
Solid sparks.
I am thrilled that the wait for the full experience is almost over and will be brushing up on my bravery until the game launches on October 8th.
How do you do that? There we go. The writer is Jessica Cogswell and editor Chris Morris. Shout out to them. That was a nice little glimpse of what we're kind of gonna be expecting there. And I'm gonna sub to them, but I'm gonna go with no notifications. That way they do pop up in my feed. Because I do like looking at these kinds of reviews and reactions, or like the initial reaction of what people felt when they played the game, because it does give you a little bit better insight. And I think they explained I think she explained very nicely what we wanted to know. The graphics look good to me. I'll be honest, guys. The graphics look good. I'm gonna play this game probably on release, at least, or near release. I'll probably play it in October, to be honest with you, but yeah, that looks sweet. That looks really cool. Chuck won't play it. Well, maybe Dugan. Maybe Dugan might. Though I've sent him a few horror games that are like this, and he never touches them. So I don't know if he avoids these or if he just, yeah, I don't know. Like, I've sent him to him, and then he'll be like, "Oh, I'm really excited about him." And then he just never plays them. So I don't know if he's really into this style. I don't know. I'm not sure. But for myself, I'm pretty tickled with what we ended up with here. Yeah, I'll be honest. I'll probably get this close to release date, at least close. I don't know if I'll pay full price for this, being that it's a remake game, so that could be, problematic. But I don't know. It looks cool.